Welcome back, guys, to Fear Begins, a step towards the horror. In today's episode, I'm sharing 8 true disturbing stories about the Appalachian backcountry. From abandoned cabins to twisted old mining roads, each story will make you question how much you really know about these ancient mountains. But before we begin, please consider subscribing. Don't forget to like the video and share it with your friends and family. I'd also love to hear where you're listening from. Thank you all for your support. It means a lot to me. Now, let's start. I am 41 years old, and for as long as I can remember, I believed I knew every inch of these hills and that nothing out here could catch me off guard. I grew up in this maze of ridges and valleys, but it turns out there are things you only discover when you stand right in front of them. My uncle owns a stretch of land near an old granite quarry about 40 minutes from a small town called Red Vale, Tennessee. He bought it in the late 70s after the company closed the place down. I was 8 the first summer I stayed there. My cousins and I spent every day outside racing through the trails, poking sticks into collapsed mine shafts, and daring each other to step over the rusted tracks that led into the darkness. At night we sat around a campfire sharing every rumor we had heard. Workers vanishing underground, strange voices echoing through the cracks. We didn't really believe those stories. They were just enough to raise the hair on our necks before we fell asleep in our sleeping bags. Last September he called me one evening, his voice thin and shaky after the stroke he had earlier that year. He asked if I could come out for a few days to help clear the main trail before the first freeze. He sounded almost ashamed to ask. I said yes so quickly he did not finish explaining what needed to be done. Part of me felt like I owed him more than a weekend of work, and part of me just wanted to get out of my own house and clear my head. Sometimes you think that being somewhere else will make everything fall into place again. I left before sunrise. The following Saturday, the sky was a dull, heavy white that made it feel like the day never really began. A cold wind rolled down the ridge and cut through my jacket. I parked by the sagging cattle gate at the bottom of the road. My breath came out in small clouds as I unloaded my supplies: an old paint can, a hammer, a bundle of rebar stakes, and a roll of neon orange marking tape that was almost painful to look at. The plan was simple: walk the trail, mark the bad trees, tag what the loggers should leave alone. It wasn't exciting work, but it felt steady and familiar. The first stretch went exactly like the countless trips before it. Before long the truck was gone behind me. The trees closed in and everything grew quiet. A steady quiet that made me feel maybe I had been right to come. I walked for about an hour, stopping every so often to check trunks for rot and driving a stake when I found one bad enough. Around the 4th marker I slowed. Something didn't match the map in my head. There should have been a fork in the trail near a huge hollow poplar. That path led up to an overlook where you could sometimes see the quarry pond shimmer in the sun. But when I reached the poplar, there was no fork, no old signpost in the weeds, just a long straight trail that seemed endless. I shifted my pack on my shoulders and told myself I must have remembered it wrong. I turned in a slow circle looking for anything familiar: a crooked birch, an old chunk of concrete, part of a fence washed down by rain. But it was all the same trees in every direction. I kept moving and convinced myself the fork was farther ahead. 20 minutes later, my legs felt heavy and my chest tight, like I had been hauling bricks uphill. I stopped and bent over to catch my breath. My pulse hammered in my head. I could not shake the thought that the trail was stretching itself out, adding more ground every time I blinked. That was when I noticed the footprints. I almost stepped in them. They were in the middle of the trail, deep and clear in the damp dirt. At first I thought of a bear, maybe a large one, but the shape was wrong. I crouched down to look closer: wide human toes and no sign of shoes. The prints started out of nowhere, like the person had just appeared and stood there pressing their weight into the ground. I touched the edge of one to see if it crumbled, but the dirt held soft and wet, as if it had only just been made. A sour taste filled my mouth. I tried to imagine a hiker, someone off trail. But after decades of coming here, I had never seen prints like that. I decided it was enough for one day. I turned expecting to see the bend in the trail leading back to the gate, but what I saw behind me was wrong. I quickened my pace. Every landmark I thought I recognized, that crooked birch, that fallen log, appeared again and again in places they did not belong, like the woods were moving themselves around me. I stopped to breathe, and that was when I heard it. Footsteps. Soft but steady, crunching through the brush. They did not get closer, but they never fell behind either. I stood still, straining to listen. My heartbeat pounded too hard to hear clearly. I thought maybe I imagined it, maybe I stepped wrong, and the echo carried back. But when I shifted my weight, the sound followed, matching me step for step. I forced my throat to work and called out, "Hello, do you need help?" No answer. Only that measured sound sliding over dry leaves. By now the light was thinning, and the trees stretched long crooked shadows across the trail. Every time I looked over my shoulder, I expected to see someone standing there. My tongue felt dry. I kept walking. My boots puffed little clouds of dust in the fading light. My throat hurt each time I swallowed. Then I turned a bend and froze. A figure stood beside the last stake I had driven into the ground. His body looked too long, as if stretched. His shoulders slumped like he was holding something too heavy to bear. His shirt was torn and faded. His jeans were soaked up to the knees, though the dirt around him was bone dry. He raised a hand, palm out, then pressed it against his chest. That gesture unsettled me more than if he had charged. It felt like he was offering something or asking me to accept it. I tried to speak, but my mouth would not work. My legs felt like cement. He stepped closer. I looked down and saw the bottoms of his feet, black with mud, smeared with dark streaks I refused to name. We stood locked in silence. My thoughts shrank to a single instinct: leave now. I stumbled backward and knocked into the paint can. The lid burst off and bright orange spilled across the ground. The figure stopped and stared at it like it was a sign. He crouched, dipped 2 fingers into the paint, and dragged a line across his palm, then lifted his hand to show me. That broke the grip holding me still. I turned and ran. My heartbeat roared louder than my breath. Every twig that snapped behind me sounded like pursuit. I don't remember the last part of the trail. One moment I was running, the next I was at my truck gasping. I scrambled onto the tailgate, nearly slipped on my gear, and fumbled at the door. My hand shook so badly it took 3 tries to get the key in. When I looked back, he stood in the trail, his hand raised, orange dripping from his fingers. He did not move as I threw the truck into reverse. I did not let up on the gas until gravel gave way to pavement. I drove straight to my uncle's house. He opened the door and did not even ask why I was back so early. He only looked at me, his mouth working like he wanted to speak, but no words came out. I did not sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that hand smeared with paint. Rising out of the dark, it has been almost a year, and I have not stepped past that cattle gate again. My uncle's will left me this cabin, so far out in the Birchfield Hills, it felt like the trees had swallowed it up on purpose. You couldn't even see the place from the main road. There was this narrow dirt track off Pinter Road, full of ruts and half-buried stones. If you didn't know exactly where to look, you'd drive right past. That always felt intentional to me, like he didn't want to be found. I hadn't seen him in almost 10 years. The last time was a strange afternoon in late summer. He was sitting on the porch in an old folding chair with a blanket over his knees, staring past me like I was just another part of the woods. His skin looked thin enough to tear, and when he finally spoke, he told me he didn't want company anymore. That was it. No explanation, no polite excuse. After that, he stopped coming to holidays, stopped calling. My mother kept saying his heart was failing, but the way she said it always sounded like she didn't completely believe it herself. The letter from the lawyer came in March, folded so neatly it almost felt like a joke. The property was mine now, whether I liked it or not, my mother asked. If I planned to keep it, I laughed, though it sounded weak. I told her no, I just wanted to clear it out, maybe list it with a realtor. I thought I could handle it in a weekend if I worked fast. I drove up on a Thursday afternoon. The farther I went, the more the road seemed to vanish behind me, like the trees were closing in. By the time I hit that dirt track, the sun was already sinking behind the ridge. My headlights didn't help much. Bouncing off trunks and catching tangled roots, the air felt wrong somehow, flat and heavy, like it had been shut away for too long. When the cabin finally appeared, it looked exactly the same as I remembered, cedar shingles curling like old bark, the front steps slumping to one side, the chimney patched so many times it looked like a child's drawing. Every window was covered with yellowed newspaper, edges lifting and curling toward the light. For a moment, I just sat in the car gripping the wheel. It felt like if I blinked, the whole place might disappear. I unlocked the door and hesitated with the key still in the lock. The smell hit me first, not rotten, but stale and clinging, like the air had kept every breath ever taken inside. I stepped in and switched on the overhead bulb. It flickered hard. Before catching, throwing light across the room in jittery bursts, the old sofa sagged under the same plaid blanket. A basket overflowing with unopened mail sat by the cold stove. The strangest thing was a coil of thick rope draped over the armchair. It looked like whoever left it there thought they'd be back any minute. I tried to shake it off. He'd been sick. People stop caring about neatness when they know their time is short. That's what I told myself. I dropped my bag by the door and started sorting the mail, focusing on dates instead of the smell. That first night, nothing happened. I heated a can of soup on the propane burner and ate it standing up. I couldn't bring myself to sit when it got dark. I pulled a quilt from the bedroom closet and lay on the sofa. The springs groaned under me. I must have drifted off eventually because I woke to a soft, steady thumping on the far wall. I stayed perfectly still, listening. It kept going, regular as a heartbeat. Each thump spaced just far enough apart to make me think it had stopped. Then it started again. When I finally stood up, it stopped completely. I waited for it to return, but the silence held. I didn't close my eyes again until dawn touched the trees. The second day was worse. I tried to keep busy, but every drawer I opened was stranger than the last. Feathers tied in neat bundles, old nails sorted into piles, glass bottles full of something thick and brown. A lot of it looked untouched for decades. Then I found the cabinet. Inside was a small iron key taped to the back wall. It was the only thing that looked new. Clean metal with sharp edges. My stomach tightened as I held it. Down the back hall was a door painted the same dull brown as the wall. I'd never noticed it as a kid. A mop leaned diagonally across it, like someone wanted it hidden but not too well. I moved the mop aside and slid the key into the lock. It turned smoothly. The hinges groaned as the door opened. No windows. A single bulb overhead that stayed dark when I flipped the switch. I raised my phone flashlight and swept the room. Concrete walls, floor marked with dark stains I didn't want to think about. A workbench stretched across the far wall. On it sat a glass jar sealed with cloudy wax. Inside was a small, perfect white skull, jaw hanging open, like it was screaming. I set it back exactly where I found it, shut the door, locked it, and dropped the key into my pocket. The rest of the day, I boxed linens and wiped shelves, but kept glancing down the hall. I couldn't shake the feeling I had seen something I wasn't supposed to that night. I locked every window and sat at the kitchen table long after dark. The stove clicked and ticked as it cooled. Then came a scraping sound above me, slow and deliberate. There was no attic, no crawl space, nothing should have been up there. The sound moved across the ceiling until it stopped right above me. My hands shook so hard I nearly dropped my phone. I backed against the wall, held my breath, and waited. Nothing else happened. I didn't move until morning when the sun rose. I climbed to the roof, but found no marks, no broken shingles, no footprints, just a thin layer of frost. I told myself it must have been an animal, but I didn't believe it. When I went back inside, I reached for the key in my pocket. It was gone. I found it in the center of the living room rug. as though someone had placed it there. That afternoon, the woods went so quiet, I could hear my own heartbeat. No wind, no birds, just a thick hush. Pressing against the cabin, I finished packing, but before leaving, I checked the lock on that door again. I told myself it was just to be sure no animal had gotten in, but the truth was I needed to know it was still closed. It was that night. I tried to sleep again on the sofa. For hours, nothing moved. Just before midnight, there was a single knock. On the locked door, I sat up so fast the quilt slid to the floor. My mouth went dry. Another knock came, louder. Then a voice rasped, dry and broken. "I'm still hungry." I pressed my hand over my mouth, not daring to breathe. The voice came. "Again, you promised." I sat frozen, staring into the dark hallway. No third knock came, only silence pressing down heavier than before. When dawn finally filtered through the edges of the newspaper, I stood on shaky legs. I left the key on the kitchen counter, locked the door, and walked down the dirt path without looking back. I picked up the survey job from a woman named Carol at the Mare County Historical Society. She wore thick glasses and kept peering over them at me, like she was trying to decide whether I was serious about wanting the work. The truth was I wasn't very serious at all. I just needed to cover rent for October, and she needed someone willing to haul a camera up an overgrown trail. She barely glanced at my resume before shoving a folder into my hands and muttering about grant money running out. All she told me was that I had to hike to the site, take photos of whatever buildings were still standing, jot down a few GPS coordinates, and bring it all back before the end of the week. It sounded like the definition of easy. That morning I parked behind the ranger shed and double-checked my gear. 2 extra batteries for the GPS unit, a notebook, a backup flashlight, and enough trail mix to last a full day if something went wrong, which of course I was sure it wouldn't. I locked the car and started up the trail, telling myself it would be no different than any other hike I'd taken through the Appalachians. Just trees, old boards, and maybe a raccoon or two rooting around. For the first hour, that was exactly what it felt like. The trail twisted back on itself again and again. Steep switchbacks that burned my calves. Runoff had carved gullies through the clay, and I kept sliding a little each time I put my weight down. Every so often I passed a crushed water bottle wedged between roots or a strip of caution tape fluttering in the breeze. It was warm for October, too warm. Every time I stopped to drink, sweat cooled on the back of my neck and made me shiver. I figured if I timed it right, I'd be back in town before late afternoon. Maybe even grab a sandwich and brag to Carol about how fast I'd finished after the 2nd-mile marker. The trail leveled out on a ledge when I looked out over the valley. I could see the line where the trees ended and the fields began. It should have been pretty, but what caught my eye were the trees ahead. They were lined up in rows so straight, it looked unnatural. Equal space between every trunk, no undergrowth at all, just clean stripes of bark and dirt, as if someone had measured the forest with a ruler. I snapped a photo to prove it was real, jotted down the time, and laughed nervously before moving on the trail, narrowed until it was barely wide enough for my boot. The ground felt strange under my steps, soft and spongy like peat bogs I'd only ever read about. When I pressed my palm into the soil, I expected water to seep up, but the dirt was bone dry. When I pulled my hand back, it was stained dark brown, almost black in the cracks, like something scraped out of a clogged drain. I wiped it on my pants and told myself it was just minerals, nothing else. The first shack appeared around a bend hidden behind black spruce, so thick I had to push through. From a distance it looked like the roof was about to slide off the walls. The whole building leaned to one side, and the doorway was dark, except for something hanging just inside. At first I thought it was a piece of canvas or a broken rafter, but then it swayed slowly, like something had brushed past it. My throat felt dry. I stood and watched. Nothing else moved. Finally, I stepped closer and saw it was just an old feed sack nailed by one corner. I laughed under my breath, more in relief than amusement. Strange how your brain always jumps to the worst. I circled the shack, counting the boards still clinging to the frame. Each window was black, either shattered or too filthy to see through. I tried shining my flashlight inside, but the beam seemed to stop in the darkness, swallowed like the air itself was thicker than it should be. I made a quick note about structural damage and kept moving up the ridge. That's when I found the footprint, not on the main trail but cutting across at an angle. Pressed so deep into the dirt, it looked fresh. Barefoot, the toes spread too wide. The heel squared off in a way that didn't look right. I crouched to study it, hoping to find some logical explanation, maybe erosion or a big animal, but it looked too human and too wrong. The edges were sharp, no leaves had drifted over it. Yet, I stood up fast, wiping my hands on my thighs even though I hadn't touched anything. I told myself I'd finish the survey quickly and leave before the shadows got long. The second shack sat higher in a hollow, circled by laurel thickets. The upper window glowed with a faint reddish light, pulsing dim, bright, dim again. I moved side to side thinking maybe it was just the sun catching old glass. But the glow didn't change. I called out. My voice cracked in the middle, no reply. I should have turned back right then, but something about quitting halfway felt worse. I stepped onto the porch. The boards sagged but held. I nudged the door with my boot. It swung open as if it had been waiting inside. The air felt colder. The walls were warped planks split open into jagged ridges. In the middle of the floor stood a wooden chair, perfectly centered under that pulsing window. A coil of rope wrapped around the seat, stained the same color as the dark dirt outside. One end trailed into the corner where the shadows swallowed it. I stared at it, uneasy with how deliberate it all seemed. Then I heard a breath behind me, slow and careful, almost curious. I spun around so fast my boot skidded, but nothing was there. The doorway gaped open. When I looked back, the rope had uncoiled across the floor, the free end pointing straight at my feet. My heart hammered so hard my vision blurred. I backed out onto the porch, gasping. The air outside pressed heavy against my skin. When I looked for the trail, it was gone, replaced by a corridor of trees leaning in close, their branches touching overhead. I turned in circles, but every direction looked the same. I chose a path at random and walked 20 paces only to find myself back at the same shack. The chair still waiting, the rope in the doorway. I pulled out my phone, desperate, but the screen flickered white and died. I yelled, but the sound fell flat like shouting. Underwater. That's when I saw the footprints again. Wide toes, flat heels, curving neatly away behind the shack. I froze, listening to my own breath rasp in the silence. Eventually, some part of me decided following them was the only choice. They led me to a clearing not on any map. In the center yawned an old elevator shaft, its edges framed by rotting beams. A single plank stretched across the opening, wide enough to cross if you were reckless. Near the edge, a wooden stake anchored another rope, its end trailing across. The plank like it was waiting. I crouched to look closer. The rope twitched once. That same breath came again from behind me when I stood. Something stepped out of the trees, too tall, shoulders sloped wrong. A strip of canvas hung where its face should have been. No eyes, no mouth, just a blank head. It lifted a long hand with the palm open, like an invitation. I stepped back. The plank over the shaft creaked loudly, and I knew if I didn't leave, it was going to drive me onto that wood until it snapped. I turned and ran. Branches tore at my arms and hair. The footprints appeared alongside me, each one fresh, stride for stride. Then suddenly the real trail reappeared. I didn't question it. I just ran until the trees opened and my car came into view, shining in the last bit of daylight. I didn't look back. I drove straight to Bellings Hollow and shoved the keys into the Historical Society's mailbox. I left a note that said, "I'm not going back." Owen and I were up there marking property lines. The county had finally approved his permit for a new logging road. He had been asking me for weeks to come help, promising it would only take a couple of hours of tying flag tape and hammering stakes. I figured it was the least I could do since he had helped me re-roof my place the year before. The air that day felt thick and heavy, almost like breathing through a warm towel. The forecast had promised cooler weather, but by noon it felt more like August than early June. We left the truck parked at the gate where the gravel ended. I grabbed the canvas bag of stakes while Owen muttered about his GPS already losing battery. I always thought that ridge was just ordinary land. My grandfather hunted there every fall. My dad used to take me mushroom picking along the switchbacks. He would whistle the same fiddle tune every time. I rolled my eyes at it back then, but secretly, it made me feel safe. Nothing in my memory suggested the ridge was anything but familiar. The first strange thing was how the GPS kept cutting out. It would beep once, then freeze, stuck like it had forgotten what it was supposed to do. Owen smacked the side of it with his hand, but it didn't help. I told him he should have bought the newer model instead of wasting money on that outdated brick. He just shot me a look and said nothing. We decided to start laying tape anyway. I went ahead tying red flags and driving stakes into the soft ground. Every 50 yards I'd hammer one in and move on. After about 30 yards I looked back to check on him. The trail was empty. I figured he had stepped off behind a tree without saying anything. I called out once, trying to sound casual. No answer. I waited and listened. No birds, no insects, no wind. The silence pressed down so heavy it made my ears feel clogged. I yelled again, louder this time, but the sound seemed to stop a few feet away. That's when I realized none of the flags I had tied were visible anymore. The trail behind me was bare. No stakes, no scraps of tape. Just undisturbed leaf litter. A hollow feeling opened in my chest. My throat went dry, and my palms itched like they wanted to grab something, but couldn't. I turned slowly in a circle, hoping to see Owen's blaze orange hat. Nothing moved. Then I noticed the footprints. They were pressed deep into the soil, far deeper than they should have been. The soles were smooth, no tread at all. The strides were too long, unnatural. I bent closer and felt my skin prickle, without thinking. I followed them. It wasn't curiosity, it was something heavier, like the silence itself pulling me along. The prints curved around a slope of boulders and led to a clearing. I swear it hadn't been there before. It was perfectly round, 20 feet across. The undergrowth was pressed flat in a neat pattern, radiating outward like it had been combed. In the center lay a square of canvas with a rusted lantern on top. A buzzing started in the back of my skull, faint but sharp. I couldn't look away from the lantern. The glass was blackened with soot, the handle polished like it had been held thousands of times. Then Owen's voice came from behind me. "You're going to want to see this." The words were his, but the tone was wrong. Too careful, too precise, like someone repeating them for the first time. I turned and saw him standing at the edge of the clearing. His arms hung straight down, palms facing backward. He didn't blink, didn't shift. He lifted one arm in a loose, unnatural wave, beckoning me closer. My mouth went dry. "Owen," I said, but he didn't respond. He only repeated the words in that same flat voice. "You're going to want to see this." I stepped back. He tilted his head in a slow, mechanical way, like a doll on a string. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. He took one stride forward, stopping perfectly at the edge of the clearing. His boot toe lined up exactly. That was enough. I turned and ran. Branches whipped against my arms, rocks slid under my boots, but I didn't feel any of it. All I could think was if I looked back, he'd be right behind me moving in that same exact line. I passed the spot where the footprints had been, but the earth was smooth again, no trace of them. My lungs burned when I broke through to an old skid trail. A strip of red flagging tape fluttered from a branch, bright and fresh. Owen was crouched there, scowling at the GPS. His face was red, hair stuck to his forehead. He looked up startled and said, "Where the hell did you go?" His voice cracked, but it was normal. It was him. I tried to answer, but nothing came out. My hands trembled so bad I shoved them in my pockets. He squinted at me and said, "You look like you saw a ghost." I just shook my head and told him we needed to leave. I didn't look at the trees the whole walk back to the truck. That night I tried to tell him. I described the clearing, the lantern, the way he spoke in that wrong voice. He stared at the table for a long time before saying he hadn't left the trail. He told me the GPS froze for an hour, and he had been calling my name until he gave up and waited. The next morning we went back with 3 men from the survey office. We searched the ridge twice. 42 years old, and I have never lived anywhere except this stretch of mountains where Tennessee and Virginia meet. My grandfather is buried on a ridge that catches the last bit of sun every evening, and I figure I will end up in the same ground. Sooner or later, folks here don't uproot easy, even when they probably should. There's a kind of stubborn pride about staying put. All my life I heard stories about Mallister Hollow. My dad called it that patch of land that can't let go. He would tell me the ridge was older than anything carved on a courthouse record, that it had a long memory for trespassers. He used to lean against the porch rail and say it like scripture. I would nod like I was listening, but mostly I thought he just liked hearing his own voice. It was a Thursday in late October when I found out he hadn't just been talking. I have been hauling freight since I was 25, big loads, steel beams, backhoe parts, scrap metal, anything that paid enough to keep my truck running and the roof over my head. That morning I had a delivery for a salvage yard tucked so far off the county road you could miss it in a blink. Folks around here don't talk about it much, even though they all know exactly where it is. The last time I had gone there, I was 17. My Uncle Kenny sent me to pick up parts for his dozer. I don't remember the parts. What stuck was the way the ridge leaned over the yard like it was watching everyone inside the fence. I set out before daylight thinking I'd be home before the chill came in. But a place like that eats up time. By the time I hit the gravel track, the sky was already turning that copper color you get before dusk, shadows stretching long across the road. The gate was the first thing that felt wrong. The fence sagged so much it looked like it could collapse. The barbed wire that used to top it was stripped away, just rusted stubs left like broken teeth. The chain on the gate hung slack but still swayed like there was wind, though the air was dead still. I cut the engine and stepped out, my boots crunching on gravel. I walked up to the office door and called out, "Delivery." My voice didn't echo back, it just felt swallowed by the quiet. I pulled my phone out and tapped it. No signal, not even a flicker. Then I noticed the plywood across the office window, slashed with fresh red paint. The words said, "Stay out after dark." It looked new, maybe even still wet. I reached out, but stopped when I saw my hand shaking. I shoved it in my pocket, telling myself it was just the cold. I knocked again, louder this time. Nothing, no footsteps, no voices, no sound at all. I told myself maybe the yard had finally shut down. Maybe some kids thought it would be funny to put up a sign. I almost believed it until I heard a scrape behind me, just one, like a boot on gravel. I turned fast but saw nothing except my own tracks. The silence felt heavier than before. I decided to drop the crate, leave the papers, and get out. I popped a trailer latch, slid the crate down, and then saw it. A piece of folded cloth wedged in the slats. I picked it up without thinking. Smooth fabric, neat edges, black stitching across the middle. It said, "You are late." I dropped it fast like it burned. My dad's words came back. The hollow doesn't forgive trespass after dark. It knows who belongs and who doesn't. I backed away from the trailer, heart pounding. I turned for the cab, but then caught movement in the mirror. Someone was standing at the back of the trailer, bent low, fingertips tracing the wood like they were reading it by touch. I wanted to run, just climb in and leave, but I couldn't. Some stubborn part of me needed to know. I called out, "Hey, you need something?" The figure straightened slow, too slow. Like the bones weren't right. Even in the fading light I knew the shape. It looked like Henry Coe, a man I'd watched them pull out of a collapsed mine shaft 20 years ago. I said his name, but when he turned his head I knew it wasn't him. It wasn't anybody whole. His face looked like wet clay that never set. Eyes, nose, mouth all in the wrong places. The mouth worked, opening and closing, trying to form words I couldn't hear. I stepped back, and it stepped forward in perfect sync. That was when the smell hit me, not rot, but like soil pulled from deep underground, damp and old. I stumbled back and caught my boot on the pallet, fell hard on the gravel, wind knocked out of me. When I looked up, there were two more figures stepping from the trees, faces ruined like. The first, moving silent, mouths twitching as if they were chewing words that wouldn't come out. I scrambled to my feet, knees shaking, and ran for the truck. The cab felt a mile away. I grabbed the handle, but my hand slipped once, twice on. The third try it caught. I yanked the door open. The engine coughed like it wanted to die. But it caught. In the mirror I saw them. 3 of them now, moving toward the trailer, heads twitching side to side, sniffing for me. I slammed the pedal. The truck roared forward. Gravel spraying. I didn't look back, not once. I didn't stop. Until I reached a speedway station 20 miles out. I left the engine running and just sat gripping the wheel. The sky turned black and still I couldn't move. The clerk came out, young kid, tapped the glass and asked if I was all right. I tried to explain, but nothing came out right. I just shook my head until he walked back inside, with that look people save for drunks or lunatics. I never went back to Mallister Hollow. The crate stayed where I left it. I didn't care. The next day, I drove the ridge roads for hours with that cloth in my pocket. I hated how light it felt, almost not real. Before sunset, I pulled over, laid it on the gravel, struck a match, and burned it down to nothing. I watched every thread curl and vanish. That was the only way I knew nothing from that yard would ever follow me home again. The first thing I noticed was how fresh those trail markers looked. Bright blue paint, clean edges. Someone had definitely been out there not long before I showed up. It struck me as strange considering the place was supposed to be mostly forgotten. I had been sent to survey this old stretch of land near the Kentucky border just to double check the boundaries for a conservation easement. My supervisor Alan said nobody had walked those lines in years. He sounded almost proud of that fact, like it proved how thorough our records were. I pulled up next to a sagging gate that looked like it hadn't been latched properly since the 90s. A single loop of baling wire kept it shut, though honestly, you could have sneezed on it and knocked the thing over. I cut the engine and just sat there for a minute, staring out across the brush. The sun was already too high for my liking. I had planned to start around 8, be back on the road by noon. Maybe grab a burger before heading home. But the drive had taken forever. A closed bridge forced me to detour onto a gravel road with potholes big enough to hide a goat. By the time I climbed out of the truck, I was already thinking about how late I'd get back. Maybe half a mile in, the trail split. One path sloped down into a shallow hollow, while the other carried on straight along the ridge. Both had the same crisp blue paint marks. I dug around in my pack until I found the folded printout of the survey notes. Not one mention of a fork. Nothing about a side trail, just a line drawing. And some vague references to old fence lines. I remember standing there longer than I probably needed to, trying to decide which way felt less wrong. The ridge trail looked clearer, less brush, fewer chances to get tangled up in brambles, I told myself. It would probably loop back around and save me some time. So I kept going along the ridge. The trail kept climbing in this steady, annoying way that made my calves burn every so often. I passed crooked old fence posts sunk deep in the dirt. They were spaced almost evenly, about 50 feet apart, each. One had a cracked little plastic tag stapled near the top, bleached almost white by the sun. I stopped to snap pictures of them, partly to prove I was doing my job and partly to give myself an excuse to catch my breath. The further I went, the thicker the brush got. Low saplings crowded the path. Wiry branches scratched at my arms and snagged my sleeves. At one point, a thorn hooked into my shirt collar and nearly yanked me off balance. I muttered something under my breath and tried not to think about how many ticks were probably hitching a ride. Eventually, I spotted a shallow trench winding through the leaves ahead. It looked too neat to be just water runoff, almost like a path worn by boots or something else that knew exactly where it wanted to go. I stopped right there, did a slow circle to see if anyone was around. Nothing, no movement, no voices, not even the usual breeze. The quiet was so complete, it felt staged, like someone had flipped a switch and shut everything off. I told myself it was just nerves, just the isolation getting to me. I kept walking, maybe. 20 yards later, I noticed a piece of rusty rebar hammered into the ground off to the right. Someone had tied a plastic grocery bag to the top, and it swayed just slightly when I came closer. There was something small weighing down the bottom. I squatted to untie it. The plastic felt a little greasy under my fingers. Inside was a folded slip of paper. Pale pencil letters spelled out one line: "Stay on the true path." My mouth went dry in an instant. I turned and looked back the way I'd come, hoping to catch a glimpse of the fork. Nothing but trees. I could picture it perfectly though, the lower trail dipping away, the ridge stretching straight ahead. I refolded the paper and stuffed it back in the bag. For a second I thought about taking it with me, but I didn't want to break whatever arrangement I had stumbled into, so I tied it right back where I found it and kept going because I didn't see any other good options. After a while, the trail leveled out into a wide patch of bare rock. On the far side, another blue mark was splashed on a tree trunk, half hidden by a drooping branch. I checked my phone for the time. 40 minutes since I had left the truck. As soon as I stepped back under the trees, the air changed. It felt heavier somehow, like the branches were leaning in closer than they had a moment before. I stopped dead. My ears started ringing with this thin, high tone, almost like I had climbed out of a swimming pool too fast. And there it was again, the same rebar stake, the same plastic bag. I stood there trying to convince myself it was a different marker. Maybe someone had reused the same bag, but I knew it wasn't. The knot was identical. The way it leaned just slightly to the left was identical. I walked up to it and unrolled the bag again. This time, the slip of paper was blank, just a fuzzy, off-white square. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it might break a rib. I tied the bag back up and started moving faster, trying not to look anywhere but straight ahead. The slope on my right kept dropping off steeper with every step. I didn't let myself glance down. It felt like if I did, the ground would vanish altogether. Around a bend, the trail curved past a dead tree. The trunk snapped clean through halfway. Up, another rebar stake leaned against it, like it had been waiting there, patient as anything. I stood there for a while, telling myself I could turn around, that nothing was stopping me. But the thought of retracing my steps made my skin crawl worse than anything ahead. It felt like I had signed some invisible contract the minute I stepped past that first fork. I pulled out my phone again. The screen read 2:07 p.m. I tapped it, expecting it to flicker back to normal. Nothing changed. I held the power button, counting out 10 seconds under my breath. Still, 2:07. I didn't look up for a long time, just kept staring at the screen, pretending it was some ordinary glitch and not a sign that the whole place was shifting around me. When I finally lifted my head, I realized there were no more blue marks, no paint, no tags, just the trench and the leaves running dead straight through the trees. I took a step forward. That was when a voice spoke low and flat right over my shoulder. Straight ahead. I didn't turn. I couldn't have turned if I wanted to. My legs felt like they were made of concrete. I took another step because standing still felt worse than anything else. The trench widened as I walked, the edges clean and smooth like it had been carved on purpose. Every few yards I spotted fresh prints. Some were boot treads, some were something else. No pattern I recognized. I kept walking until the ridge narrowed into a ledge of rock. On the far side, a single wooden post stuck up, black and soft with rot. Another folded piece of paper was nailed to it. I didn't want to touch it. My hands felt like they didn't belong to me as I reached out. 2 words in that same faint pencil. Not yet. I don't remember making the choice to leave 1 second. I was staring at those letters, and the next I was turning around, walking back along the trench, my boots scraping through the leaves. The whole time nothing moved, no birds, no insects, just the silence pressing in from every direction. like the trees were holding their breath to see if I'd keep going. When I finally reached the fork again, my knees nearly buckled. I braced against the closest fence post and tried to catch my breath. Both trails looked exactly the same. The only difference was a scrap of paper nailed to the nearest post. I unfolded it with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. This way ends. I didn't want to find out what that meant. I took the lower trail without a single glance over my shoulder. Every few steps I expected to see that same rebar stake waiting for me again. But the path stayed clear, no markers, no voices, just the normal quiet of the woods. I kept walking. Faster and faster until my lungs burned and my breath came in short, ragged gasps. I didn't stop until I saw the sagging gate through the trees. My truck was exactly where I had left it. I turned the key. The dashboard clock said 5:42 p.m. I didn't bother logging any coordinates. Didn't snap another picture. I just drove straight back to the field office and handed over my report. My delivery route used to snake across a maze of narrow highways in the hills outside Linwood. The kind of place where the trees leaned in so close, it felt like you were driving through a tunnel, carved just wide enough for a truck to scrape by. The roads out there didn't have real shoulders, only gravel and weeds sloping into deep ditches where the bottom disappeared into darkness at night. The company always offered hazard pay for the late shifts since most people didn't want them. I took them anyway, maybe because I liked the quiet after midnight, or maybe because I liked how it felt when no one could see me. That night I had already been driving almost 10 hours straight. My eyes burned like I had been dragging them across sandpaper. My last stop had taken me up a mining road patched over and over, a road that still felt like one long pothole. By the time I made it back to the highway, my gas gauge had been blinking empty for 20 minutes. The needle so far past red, it looked like it was trying to bury itself in the dash. I knew the closest truck stop was 20 miles down Route 16. Bright LED lights, stale coffee, and all. I had done that run before on fumes. I could have pushed it, but when I came around a bend near a broken guardrail, I saw another place. A squat block of concrete set back from the road. Most nights it was dark, but that night its sign flickered weakly. Just enough that I couldn't pretend I hadn't seen it. I don't know what made me pull in. Maybe I was too tired to be smart. Maybe I thought it was better to stop under a roof than break down on the roadside with no signal. Or maybe after too many nights alone on those roads, some part of me just wanted to see another human being, even if it was in a place like that. I swung the truck into a faded strip of parking and rolled up to the nearest pump. The gravel crunched too loud under the tires. I cut the engine and sat there in the silence, my hands still buzzing from the road, my ears ringing with leftover noise. For a long moment I didn't move, just stared at the building. No neon signs, no working lights, only a single yellow square glowing from behind the counter, the kind of weak bulb you'd expect in a closet. The windows were so dusty, it blurred the inside. But after a moment I saw her, an older woman with short gray hair, standing still behind the counter. Her faded blue shirt hung too loose, no logo, no name tag, just her hands flat on the surface as if bracing herself. She didn't look up when I opened my door. I hesitated but walked to the entrance anyway. The bell above the door gave a thin metallic ring like it hadn't been used in years. Still she didn't move, didn't even blink. I cleared my throat. "Evening," I said. "Do the pumps work?" Her chin lifted just slightly, her wide eyes fixed on something past my shoulder. She didn't look at me, didn't look at anything close, only at something I couldn't see. Then without lowering her gaze, she raised a hand and pointed toward the far row of pumps near the trees. I turned, half expecting to see a sign, but there was nothing, just cracked pavement and pine pressing in. When I looked back, she hadn't moved. Her arms stayed raised, her eyes still wide. I thought about leaving, pushing on to the truck stop. But something in me resisted, like if I turned my back, something would follow. So I walked toward the pumps she had pointed to, my boots scraping the pavement, each step feeling louder than it should, like I was announcing myself to whatever was out there. The pumps stood dark and silent. Between them was a small cabinet bolted to a rusted plate. A yellowed sheet of paper taped across it, the words scrawled in thick marker. "For your own safety, don't look behind you." I gave a weak laugh that died in my throat. It felt like a bad horror movie prop, but my palms tingled and the hair on my neck rose anyway. I turned slowly, syrup thick, just to prove it wrong. The lot was empty. The road swallowed in black, nothing moved. When I looked back, the cabinet door was open. Inside was a box of keys, each tied with a tag marked in the same handwriting, all with dates, months back, even a year old. Only one was fresh, tonight's date. My gut went heavy. I took a step back without meaning to. The window was empty now, the woman gone, only that dim square of yellow light. Then I heard it, a scrape behind me, soft like a shoe dragging across pavement. I turned my head, and there he was, a man standing between the pumps I'd passed, his arms dangling stiff, his clothes the same faded blue, his hair smooth like it had been pasted on, his face blank, pale, with hollows where eyes should have been, and a mouth stretched too wide. I stumbled back, scrambling for my keys, jammed them into the ignition, turned, click, hollow and loud. Louder than anything else. I tried again, click. When I looked up, he hadn't moved. But the woman was stepping into the lot now, her stiff walk jerking forward, her hands twitching like she was reaching for something I couldn't see. I bolted out of the cab, running for the cabinet, tearing through the tags with shaking hands until I found the one marked tonight. When I turned back, they were closer, their heads tilting in the same unnatural rhythm. I clutched the key so hard it cut my palm, shoved it into the ignition. This time it turned smooth, the engine roaring alive. As my headlights swept across them, they both lifted their hands, palms out, like feeling along a wall. I didn't stop, not for 50 miles, not even when my phone signal came back. I kept driving until the sky behind me turned gray, and I didn't look back once. I am 28 years old. My cousin Maeve called me in late September and asked if I would help clear out our grandfather's cabin, the one hidden deep in the Blue Ridge foothills. It was never the kind of place you visited on a whim, even as a kid. The drive up those winding switchbacks made my stomach tighten, like the mountain wanted to fold in on itself and trap us there. Maeve had always felt more attached to that cabin. She said we owed it to him to at least go through the old boxes, maybe find photographs or letters he never burned. I agreed, mostly because the thought of the place collapsing under ivy and silence unsettled me. Like it had been waiting all this time for someone to remember it still existed. We left before sunrise to beat the fog. The gravel track looked narrower than I remembered, worn down by years of neglect. Eventually, it felt like we were crawling more than driving, the truck rattling over rocks and roots. When we reached the clearing, the sky had turned pale, not morning and not afternoon, just that in-between hour when nothing feels right. The cabin looked almost the same, the sagging roof, the gray walls weathered by sun and rain. But standing there again, older, I felt a weight in my chest as though the air itself resented us. The door stuck halfway, and Maeve had to slam her shoulder into it until the hinges popped so loud it made me flinch. Inside smelled like stale paper and something else I could not name. Dust drifted through the lantern light, outlining crooked stacks of furniture, like someone had started moving things and given up halfway. We worked for hours dragging crates outside and stacking them unevenly on the porch. Every time I set something down, I glanced at the tree line. An old habit. I never liked turning my back on those woods. It always felt like the ridge leaned in closer, watching. I kept thinking about my grandfather coming here alone, even when he was too sick to carry anything heavier than a thermos. Never explained why. He only ever said he liked the quiet. By late afternoon, Maeve decided to drive into town to fill the gas cans before the station closed. I stayed behind to keep working with the last of the daylight. I watched her taillights bounce away until the clearing was silent. The air seemed different without her there, sharper, like it had turned its attention to me. I tried to focus, stacking Boxes and carrying out old tools. Sweat stuck my shirt to my back. That was when I noticed it, a path behind the yard. I swear it had not been there before. The grass was pressed perfectly flat, too neat to be natural, running in a straight line from the trees to the bottom step of the porch. No curve, no animal tracks, no tire marks. It looked deliberate, like someone had walked that same route over and over until the ground gave in. I told myself it could be deer, but even that felt like a weak excuse. The air tasted metallic, like static before a storm. I turned away to grab a better lamp. The first would not light. The second flickered like it wanted to quit. Still, I carried it outside. Each time I looked up, that path was there, leading straight to me. I stacked another box, wiped my hands, tried to ignore it. Then I saw movement inside the doorway. Too quick, gone before I could focus. But I knew something had been standing there, close enough to reach me. When I turned, it slipped back with a smoothness that did not belong in a house full of rotting floorboards. I stood frozen, straining to hear. Nothing. I whispered Maeve's name, but my voice cracked like it had not been used in hours. I tried. Again, louder. No answer. I stepped toward the doorway, the lamp shaking in my hand. Inside, the shadows looked heavier, shifting on their own. The air cooled against my face but pressed down on my chest. My fingers tingled like I could not breathe right. I set the lamp on the counter and spoke out loud, telling myself it was just the light, just exhaustion. But the words rang hollow. Then the porch boards creaked one by one, slow, deliberate. As if someone tested each step, I turned my head toward the nearest window and saw it. A pale arm sliding past the glass, far too long. The elbow bending the wrong way, the hand dragging slowly across the sill. It paused, as if it knew I was watching. My heartbeat roared in my ears. Then it slipped away, no sound, no retreat. I counted seconds in my head. 10, 20, 30, but the silence held. The lamp flickered, stretching my shadow across the walls in crooked shapes. I forced myself to the back door. My hand shook so bad I barely hooked the latch. It scraped open with a scream. Outside, the clearing looked normal in the fading light, except for that path, darker now, as though the earth itself had sunk lower. I did not look back. I walked down the slope one step at a time, the woods too quiet. My foot caught a root and I crashed forward, my palms burning as bark tore skin. But I did not stop. Halfway to the road, the lamp gave a soft pop and died. Darkness sealed around me. That was when I heard it, breathing, slow and steady, not mine. I kept one hand on a tree trunk and pushed forward. Each step stretched out like hours, like the woods themselves did not want me to leave. Then headlights cut through the trees. I stumbled into the road waving. Maeve slammed the brakes, her face pale. She asked what happened, but nothing came out. I could not force words. She took the dead lamp from my hand like I might drop it. We stood there in silence. I never told her everything. I do not think I could have. The next morning we drove back. The clearing was untouched, no footprints, no flattened grass. The path was gone. But on the cabin window where I had seen that arm, a pale smear curved across the glass, the color of bone. Maeve reached for a rag to wipe it away, but I stopped her. I locked the cabin door, even though I knew it did not matter. Whatever had been there did not care about locks. It had been watching long before we arrived, and I knew it would keep watching long after we were gone.